Hello, my name is Dave Cerri. I'd like to introduce this historical slideshow that was compiled over 20 years ago by my late father, Lawrence Cerri. My father was an active and passionate supporter of Watervliet. A lifelong resident and professional author, he combined his love of writing and his love for the city of Watervliet. I hope you enjoy this presentation and take away a small part of his love and admiration for Watervliet's past generations and rich history.
The Mohican Indians lived in the Watervliet area for more than 2 centuries, raising corn, making canoes, and doing other things before they were driven out by the Mohawks, who were quite warlike. The Mohawk tribe of the Iroquois Confederacy drove the Mohican tribes from the lands on which Watervliet now stands. They were here for many years. It was said that the powerful Mohawks could defeat all enemies because they had more than 700 warriors. The first white men to come to the area were French traders. In 1524, Giovanni de Verrazzano, sailing for the French king Francois I, explored the Hudson, calling it La Grande Riviera. He opened the area to French fur traders. In the early 1600s, Etienne Brule, a French trader from Canada, came south to trade with the Indians for furs. A later French historian said that he had found evidence that the French had built a fur trading camp, not only on Castle Island near Albany, but also at Center Island. Henry Hudson, an Englishman financed by the Dutch East India Company, sailed up the Hudson River in 1609 and anchored his ship, the Half Moon, near present-day 19th Street. Henry Hudson anchored his ship, the Half Moon, at what is now present-day 19th Street, and remained there for 2 days in September 1609. Hudson sent a party north in a rowboat to the southern tip of Center Island, off what had been the foot of 23rd Street. The party said the water was too shallow to sail any further north. The Dutch, influenced by Hudson's reports, handed out land to the patroons in 1630. The powerful and influential pearl merchant Kilian van Rensselaer received a tract of land 25 miles long and 45 miles wide. His land, the manor of Rensselaerwyck, included most of present-day Albany and Rensselaer counties. In the early 1600s, Peter Stuyvesant, the Dutch governor of New Netherlands, decided to settle people in the upper Hudson Valley on various patroon grants. Dutch settlers came north to the Kilian van Rensselaer patroon. They settled in the Albany area, including all of Albany and Rensselaer counties. This included an area called the Flats that became the southern section of Watervliet. Arent van Curler was the first permanent white settler here. He bought a huge tract of land known as the Flats and built a home there in 1643. Peter Schuyler bought the Flats in 1691 when he married the daughter of Kilian van Rensselaer, Maria van Rensselaer. Schuyler improved the Schuyler Mansion on the Flats, which had been built by Arent van Curler. Peter Schuyler later became mayor of Albany. The Schuylers occupied the Flats for nearly 2 centuries. During the late 1600s, during King William's War, Colonel John Winthrop brought his troops to the Flats. They stayed in camp there before marching off to Canada to fight the French in Canada. In the mid-1700s, the British built this stage station in Port Schuyler on the King's Highway, the route between Albany and Old Saratoga. The building was later used as a schoolhouse and later housed the Thomas E. Flynn American Legion Post. The British also built this toll house in the 1700s in Port Schuyler, so that the travelers on King's Highway needed to pay to use the road. It cost 2 pence for passengers and a shilling for vehicles. When the English built the King's Highway, which ran through the Flats from Albany to Old Saratoga, General August Howe camped his troops on the Flats before going north to fight the French in 1758. General Howe was killed at Fort Ticonderoga. The Schuylers wanted to bury him on the flats, but he was buried from St. Peter's Anglican Church in Albany. Colonel Daniel Morgan and his sharpshooters also camped on the flats during the Revolutionary War. They fought at the Battle of Saratoga. In the early 1700s, as more people came to the area, a man named Derrick Vanderheyden began the first ferry across the river between Watervliet and Troy in 1710. Descendants of Vanderheyden ran the business until 1794, when a man named Carey Clark bought out the ferry service. Increasing population in the area meant more traveling, and a regularly scheduled stage line was opened in 1791 between Albany and Saratoga, with the Watervliet Station a major stopping place. This building, the Roth Tavern, was opened on the Watervliet Schuyler Farm in the mid-1700s to accommodate soldiers and travelers who passed through the flats. Parts of this inn still stand on 16th Street and was the home of Dr. William Stewart. The house was also the home of Ernest and Bernice Meneely. The Shakers moved to the area in 1774 and established a large settlement in Watervliet Township. Mother Ann Lee, the leader, arrived with 8 people. They were a religious group called officially the Society of Believers in the Second Coming of Christ. They believed Christ would return as a woman. At their religious meetings, they danced with a whirling, trembling shuffle movement, and their neighbors called them the Shaking Quakers. Mary Pierce, here with her community, was the last leader of the Watervliet Shakers. Their properties were abandoned in 1928 and sold in 1938. It ended a century and a half of existence in this area. In 1806, James Gibbons, a land developer from Albany, bought a large tract of land from the Schuylers and established the village of Gibbonsville. It included the area from the current 8th Street in Port Schuyler northward to 15th Street. James Gibbons built this rough-hewn house on the bank of the Hudson, near the foot of what had been 14th Street running to the river. Gibbons established a post office, church, and a school in Gibbonsville in the early 1800s. In 1813, the first school was established, and William Andrews was the first teacher. He was also a grocer by occupation. This farmer, James Bleecker, owned a large farm north of Gibbonsville that included most of the northern end of present-day Watervliet. In 1836, Bleecker sold his farm property to the West Troy Company, which established the village of West Troy. Also in 1836, a group of land developers called the West Troy Company, and headed by Nathan Warren of Troy, bought a huge farm from John Bleecker. The 3 villages now comprise the area that became Watervliet: Port Schuyler, Washingtonville to the south, controlled by the Schuylers, Gibbonsville in the center, controlled by the Gibbons family, and West Troy to the north, controlled by the West Troy Company.
The first church in Watervliet was the Reformed Protestant Dutch Church of Washingtonville and Gibbonsville, established in 1814. The first pastor was Philip Bronk. Francis Emery made this painting of the first Dutch Reformed Church. In 1840, the parish divided and the North Reformed Dutch Church was established on Buffalo Street, now First Avenue. The Reverend Oscar Gregory was the first pastor of the new parish. This church still stands today across the street from the library and senior citizens center. This was the Bethel Church in the 1800s, located on Union Street, which is now 23rd Street. The first Methodist church was built on the corner of First Avenue and 14th Street in 1830. The church still stands and conducts regular services. The Trinity Episcopal Church was established in Watervliet in 1837. The Reverend Mr. Cooley became the first pastor.
After a disastrous fire at the turn of the century, the congregation built this unique church, which is still in use today. The Germain South Reformed Church was organized in 1844 and continues to this day. However, the church has been repaired and remodeled several times. The First Presbyterian on 23rd Street, built in 1874. This church began as a mission house in 1834 at the lower end of Broadway to serve the canalers who worked at the side cut. St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church was organized in 1839. The first pastor was Reverend William F. Sheehan. The new church was built in 1839 and continues to hold masses today. This is how the church looked in 1909. Father William Sheehan served as pastor of St. Patrick's Church for 51 years, from 1858 to 1909. When he passed away, some 40,000 people attended his funeral. In 1985, St. Patrick's Church began a repair and renovation of the church bell tower. Here, a workman works on the tower high above the street. This is Mount Carmel Church. The building was first St. Patrick's Church, built in 1839, also to serve the canalers. St. Bridget's Roman Catholic Church was built in 1850 under the supervision of Father Thomas Kyle. The Reverend William Callahan took over in 1854 and remained there until 1883. The church is still in existence as part of the Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish. With the influx of immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, other churches sprang up in Watervliet. This is St. Nicholas Orthodox Church on the corner of 24th Street and 4th Avenue, built in the early 1900s. St. Peter's Armenian Apostolic Church is high on a hill at the west end of Watervliet. This church was built in the 1970s. When West Troy was organized in the 1830s, the area had also organized 4 school districts. This is the type of one-room schoolhouse that was built in the mid-1800s. In 1893, the city built the first high school. This building located on 14th Street and 5th Avenue, and later became School 3 Elementary School. This structure was the high school until the early 1900s, when the city built a new high school at 14th Street and 1st Avenue. This is the 7th grade class of School 9 after the school was opened in 1908 to accommodate the growing need for school space in Watervliet. This building was built in 1893 as a new high school and remained so until the present high school was built in 1937. It is now the Watervliet Civic Center. This is the 1908 Watervliet High School baseball team. This picture is in front of School 3, which has been the first high school in the city. In 1937, the city built this new high school. It was a WPA project and one of the most beautiful schools at the time. In the 1970s, the city obtained this building on 25th Street from the Norton Company. They built a modern, well-furnished elementary school. DeWitt Clinton, the governor of New York in the early 1800s, proposed that a canal be built from the Hudson River north of Albany to Buffalo. The canal would open the state for trade and settlement from the Hudson to the Great Lakes. The state of New York began the construction of the Erie Canal through Watervliet in 1817. Here, dozens of workers labored to construct the side cut at 23rd Street to enter the canal from the Hudson. The canal was completed in 1825 all the way from Albany to Buffalo. Canalers, mostly transients, worked on barges that traveled from West Troy to Buffalo. They were a harsh bunch who drank, caroused, and got into trouble at the West Troy side cut. Thus, the village was called the Barbary Coast of the East because of all the killings, robberies, and fightings among the canal barge workers. Chief among the factors which helped to make Watervliet, West Troy, so riotous was that it served as a paying point just as Buffalo was at the western end of the canal. During the early years, mules pulled barges and packet boats. The teamsters often gave children a penny to watch the mules while they took time to duck into the nearest saloon for a refreshing tankard of beer. The canal children accompanied their parents who ran canal boats between Watervliet and Buffalo. They were often chained to the deck so they would not fall into the canal and drown. This is one of the many lock tenders on the canal. Watervliet had 4 such locks. The biggest was on 23rd Street. Tenders often put their children to work to help them out. This picture is from the 1880s. Here, a barge captain changes mule teams. One team rested on the deck of the barge while the other team pulled the boat through the canal. The animals walked on the edge of the canal bank while they pulled. These are loaded barges on the canal in the vicinity of 14th Street. They are waiting their turn to pass into the side cut and move west. The Erie Canal as it appeared in the late 1800s. Canal boats did not use the Watervliet during the winter months because the river and the canal froze over, making it necessary for barges to remain moored here all winter. These are passengers on a packet boat in the early 1900s. The boat would go through the side cut lock and then over to the canal to Buffalo. This was the side cut of the canal at the foot of 23rd Street, where dozens of barges wait their turn to enter the locks. This is the canal way station located between 25th and 26th Street at 2nd Avenue. It was built in 1853 and replaced the first wooden way lock located at the south side of Union Street, 23rd Street, just below Broadway. It was constructed and moved during the enlargement of the Erie Canal. All boat captains had to have their vessels weighed to determine how much toll to pay before going through the canal westward. This is a passenger packet that carried people over the canal. It cost 4 cents a mile and included meals. Sometimes entire families and their belongings travel from Watervliet to towns in western New York State. Over 5,000 freight and packet boats went through the 23rd Street side cut the first years of operation and over 7,000 the second year. Private people also use the canal. Here, a man paddles his gondola on the canal in the Port Scholar section of the city. Here's a view of the canal in the early 1900s. Broadway is on the left, and to the rear is the 19th Street Bridge running over the canal. A view of the canal side cut at 23rd Street during the winter. Hordes of barges are tied up here for the winter and would not be in use until spring. This is the Erie Canal in the early 1900s. This scene is looking south with the 19th Street Bridge in the background. Since canal business brought so many people to Watervliet, big hotels like the Larkin House were built to house barges and packet captains, crews, and sometimes passengers while they waited 2 or 3 days to enter the canal through the 23rd Street side cut. This is the Collins House, which was built in the early 1800s to accommodate the canalers who came through to West Troy at the side cut of the canal at the foot of 23rd Street. The hotel was at 16th Street and Broadway. In the 1920s, when the state opened the barge canal at Waterford, the Erie Canal outlived its usefulness and was abandoned. During the next 20 years, the canal ditch in Watervliet was filled in with dirt between Broadway and 2nd Avenue. This is the last remainder of the old Erie Canal that went out of business in 1923. This was part of the way station between 25th Street and 26th Street on 2nd Avenue. It is the only visible site today to understand what the canal looked like. The way lock at West Troy was one of the first of 3 on the canal. The others were at Albany and Utica. Rochester and Syracuse later constructed way locks.
When the state promised to build the canal, the U.S. government agreed to establish the Gibbonsville Arsenal in 1813 to supply a depot for the troops fighting in the War of 1812. The government bought 12 acres from John Gibbons for this purpose. The arsenal made muskets and ammunition during the War of 1812 and the Civil War in 1860. They load military arms on riverboats at the Arsenal dock on the Hudson. From this beginning, the Arsenal would one day build huge cannon and naval guns. Here, the first workers at the new arsenal are making bullet cartridges for soldiers who were fighting in the War of 1812. After the Civil War, the arsenal began making cannons and this change stopped the arsenal from closing down. These were some of the first early cannons produced about 1890. This is a big cannon produced in 1890. The U.S. government had considered closing the arsenal in the 1880s, but decided to turn the works into a big gun factory. Both the city and the arsenal were busy during World War I and after the war. The city held a victory parade to honor Watervliet soldiers who fought in the war. A canal trunk ran right past the arsenal wall and was an easy access to loading arms on barges. Here are cannon barrels waiting to be shipped. The arsenal maintained its own cemetery. The first man buried there was a workman killed in an explosion in 1850. The last person buried there was a soldier stationed at the arsenal who died in 1929. Most of the bodies had been removed to other cemeteries. During World War II, the arsenal manufactured big 14-inch and 16-inch guns for the U.S. Navy ships. Here are some of these guns in the big gun shop at the arsenal. During World War II, the arsenal worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to turn out guns for the war effort. For the first time, large numbers of women worked here. This is Miss Frances Kantrowitz boring a barrel of a small cannon in 1943. Arsenal personnel loaded big guns on vessels at the arsenal dock on the Hudson for shipment to various places. This was the entrance to the arsenal about 1910. Until the 1930s, the arsenal was not sealed off and anyone could walk about the grounds. The arsenal thrived throughout the 20th century. Colonel Edwin Bricker, who commanded the arsenal in 1923, was the first officer who felt that a history of the arsenal should be preserved. He established the Arsenal Library and wrote a history of the arsenal himself. The arsenal has established a museum on the grounds located in this building. The entire structure was built of metal in 1859 so the forging fires would not set the buildings on fire. The museum opened in 1987 and has a library.
Our city produced many notable people. Anne Grant lived with the Schuylers on the Flats for over 10 years. She wrote the book Memoirs of a Lady, which gave a full description of life on the Flats and the Schuyler House in the 1700s. This book is still available through the library. The renowned Leland Stanford was born in West Troy on March 9, 1824. He helped build the Transcontinental Railroad and became governor of California. Artist Annie Shaw was born in West Troy in 1852 and died in Chicago in 1887. She painted local and Adirondack landscapes and was the first woman to win an award from the Chicago Academy of Arts in 1886. Colonel Albert Pauling was a native of the Flats. He commanded a regiment of troops at White Plains and Long Island during the Revolutionary War. He later moved to Troy and became a county sheriff and mayor of Troy. He died in the late 1820s. Several hundred men from Watervliet served in World War II in the 1940s. Among the most noted was Peter D'Alessandro, who won the Congressional Medal of Honor during the Battle of the Bulge. Here he is receiving his medal from President Truman after the war. D'Alessandro had been a prisoner of war. Stephen Vincent Benet was born in Pennsylvania but came to Watervliet when his father was assigned to the Arsenal in the early 1900s. He won the Pulitzer Prize for his stories and poems. Patty Ryan was a local boxer from Watervliet who won the heavyweight championship in 1888. He later lost the title to John L. Sullivan. He returned to Watervliet where he ran a bar for many years around the 23rd Street Canal side cut. This is an ad that appeared throughout the East Coast to promote a heavyweight championship fight between West Troy's Patty Ryan and heavyweight champion Joe Goss of England. The fight was in West Virginia in 1880. The match lasted 87 rounds and was a draw. Lieutenant Waters Bremen, originally from Lansingburg, married a girl from West Troy, as Watervliet was known. He fought many Civil War battles and settled in Watervliet after the war and became a member of the New York State Assembly. James Cullens of Watervliet served at San Juan Hill during the Spanish-American War when only 16 years old. He later served in World War I at the age of 40 at the Battle of Verdun. Charlotte Young was a Red Cross nurse from Watervliet during World War I, and she received an American Army Nurse Corps commendation for bravery under fire. James Benicia Boy Heenan was born in West Troy in 1835. He was an Erie side-cut brawler and was elected to the Boxing Hall of Fame. The city was still rural in the late 1800s and early 1900s. People still traveled about Watervliet in horse and buggies. By the late 1800s, passenger traffic on the river became very heavy, with many river boats taking people up and down the Hudson. Passenger boats, tugs, freights, and barges regularly plied the Hudson River to carry people and cargo during the late 1800s. The Hudson is still used today for pleasure and business. In the 1860s, this steel bridge was the first metal bridge to connect Troy and West Troy. The bridge carried heavy traffic while the riverboats carried many cargoes up and down the Hudson River. The first Congress Street Bridge between Watervliet and Troy was built in the 1800s at Broadway and 19th Street. Tolls were 2 cents for pedestrians and 5 cents for vehicles. This is the location today, looking south on Broadway toward 16th Street. This was the same location in the 1950s before urban renewal and the construction of I-787. This is the same location in the 1880s. This is the Collins House Hotel on the northeast corner across from where McDonald's is now located. The second Congress Street Bridge was carrying heavy traffic across the span between Watervliet and Troy in the 1930s. The state tore down the Congress Street Bridge in 1971. They replaced the 2-lane bridge with a 4-lane bridge between Watervliet and Troy. This is the first steam-powered train in the area. The DeWitt Clinton ran between Albany and Schenectady in 1831. The train made a stop in Watervliet. The Watervliet Railroad Station was built in the 1800s between 19th and 23rd Streets. It served the city for nearly a century. It closed in the 1960s when the D&H Railroad ended passenger service through Watervliet. By the early 1900s, passenger trains like this were serving Watervliet on railroad routes between New York and Montreal. For a time, an Amtrak passenger train served Watervliet between New York and Montreal. The train was switched to a route through Schenectady, ending all train service through Watervliet. Now, freight trains like this one are the only trains that run through Watervliet. Trolley cars served the city from the 1800s until about the 1930s. This trolley ran from Troy to Schenectady, through Watervliet, up 25th Street, and over 6th Avenue, up to 19th Street, and then into rural Colony. Electricity came to Watervliet in the 1880s, and this crew from Albany Illuminating Company took care of electric services for residents and business in Watervliet.
Julius Hanks came to Troy in 1808 to start a foundry here and a hardware business in Gibbonsville. He came from Scotland and became a leading citizen of Gibbonsville and became the first president of the village. Hanks financed his son-in-law, Andrew Meneely, who started the Meneely Bell Foundry in Gibbonsville in 1826. The foundry operated in Watervliet for more than 100 years and employed hundreds of workers. The Meneely Bell Company had over a 140-year history of building more than 65,000 bells and carillon sets. The foundry went out of business in the 1950s. Here, the foundry workers cast a large bell inside the plant. Manili Bell also built carillons and shipped them all over the world, including the United States, Canada, and Asia. This is a carillon for the Iowa State Teachers College at Cedars Falls, Iowa, in front of the plant in the 1930s. The Manili Bell building was torn down in 1975 to make room for urban renewal. This plaque marks the site near the Senior Citizen Center, public library, where the famous foundry once stood. This plaque was established by the Watervliet Historical Society. Another major industry in Watervliet was the James Roy & Son textile mill, built in 1843. Up to about 1870, woolen shawls were the main product. Later, woolen cloth and ladies' dress goods were produced. At its peak, the firm hired more than 700 people. It closed in the early 1900s, and the Pasinal Paint Company later took over some of the buildings. This is James Roy. He was born in Scotland and came to Gibbonsville in 1835. He joined a small satinette firm that was operated by John Noer. This was the inside of the mill. They manufactured products with a gross value exceeding $1 million. Inside the Royal Mills. This brick building is all that remains of the Roy Mills. This is now part of Pasinal Paints. The Barker Textile Mill, also known as Jupiter Mills, opened on Broadway in the late 1800s and was a major employer in the Watervliet area. They churned out textile products until the business closed in the 1950s. It was torn down for the I-787 highway. Another firm was the J.M. Jones Car Works, established in Watervliet in 1839. The firm built wagons, carriages, and then later trolley cars that they shipped all over the world, including India. At one time, the firm employed over 300 people. This is a plan of the Jones Car Works in 1839. The plant was located on Berlin Street, 8th Street, and made carriages, wagons, and trolleys. This was one of the most popular trolleys built at the Jones Car Works when they became electric. This one was built in 1880. With the advent of electricity, the Jones Car Works soon made more and more electric trolleys like this one from the late 1800s, which ran between Albany and Troy through Watervliet. The firm went out of business after World War I. This is the Jones Car Works in the early 1920s. Business fell badly as the trolley gave way to trains and buses. Only a small part of Jones Car Works remained in the 1920s. Covert Manufacturing Company was a major industry in Watervliet. James C. Covert had over 50 patents. All types of snaps and buckles for horses and wagons, ropes, halters, ties, and chain goods were produced. When the plant on 16th Street burned down in 1973, they moved to Avenue B and 18th Street before going out of business in 1986. Henrietta Apartments are located on the original site. Dr. Louis Berry supposedly enjoyed a distinguished pharmaceutical career in France before coming to West Troy. The Dr. Berry Medical Company was established in Watervliet in the 1880s. They did a good business selling sure cures, snuff, ointments, and powders. This is the Berry plant on the corner of 5th Avenue and 16th Street. They employed over 300 people. Robert Tunnard took over the firm, which continued to operate into the 1900s, but went out of business before World War I. For years, the Freihofer Baking Company served people and stores in Watervliet with horse-drawn delivery wagons. Here's one of the last such wagons in the 1950s on 23rd Street. The Tilley Ladder Company was established by John Tilley in 1850. The Altec established itself in Watervliet as Ludlam Steel back in 1907, and this was its first plant. Their history goes back to the Revolutionary War. Tech Hughes Company began as the Autograph Brush Factory in 1902 by Henry Alexander, who opened a plant in Troy. He moved to Watervliet in the 1930s, taking over the building of the old Foreman and Clark Company. The firm later became a division of International Playtex Corporation, manufacturing plastic products and brushes. The building was demolished in recent years. The Norton Company began as a one-man operation by Herman Baer in 1872. In 1922, the firm merged with the Manning Company to become Baer Manning. Baer Manning opened its plant in Watervliet in 1931 as one of the largest sandpaper manufacturing enterprises in the U.S. It became a division of Norton Company. In 1977, the firm merged with Christensen Corp. The John Hilton store on Broadway was established in the 1860s. The store made deliveries to people, hotels, bars, and restaurants. The Save the Baby Company was established by William Lee in the 1870s. Their formula to help children's coughs comes from an old Indian recipe. Here, Lois Klein bottles the formula from a basement in a house on 24th Street. William Lee moved his business to Watervliet from Green Island in 1902. This is the Edwin Emery General Store, one of the largest. It was established in the 1870s on Broadway. The building still exists. This is the Iceland Athletic Club in 1925. Many people learned to skate on the frozen Erie Canal. The O'Brien Ice Company was one of the largest in upstate New York. It began about 1860 and operated until the 1930s when refrigerators replaced ice in the homes and businesses. One of the first businesses in West Troy was the Kennedy and Murphy Brewery. They also had a plant in Troy. About 1831, Sanford and Perry established the Sanford Pottery in West Troy. They made earthen jars, plates, platters, etc. This is the type of jug that was made at the Sanford Pottery. The National Bank of Watervliet opened in 1905 at 19th Street and Broadway and later became the Watervliet branch of the State Bank of Albany. It was torn down in 1970 to make room for the new Congress Street Bridge. These are banknotes issued by the Watervliet Bank. This was a scene on Broadway in the early 1930s, a busy street with a large number of businesses on both sides. The present-day City Hall is at the far end of the street in the center. This is Broadway looking north from 16th Street as it appeared in 1950 when the street was still crowded with stores and homes before urban renewal.
In 1896, the village of West Troy, which had absorbed Washingtonville and Gibbonsville, officially became the city of Watervliet. The first mayor was Michael J. Day, a local businessman who took office in 1897. The first city government was located in Carpenter's Hall on Broadway. It later became a firehouse when the city built a new city hall on 15th Street. The Spartan Hook and Ladder Company became the first fire station in Watervliet, West Troy, in 1866. The firehouse was located at the Side Cut Fire District. This was one of their vehicles, the Duffy Steamer No. 2. William Angus became the first fire chief of the first full-time fire department in West Troy when he headed up the reorganized McIntyre Hose Company in 1883. One of the earliest permanent brick firehouses in Watervliet was the West Troy Firehouse on 23rd Street between 6th and 7th Avenues. This building still stands today. In 1917, the fire department got its first motorized vehicle, thus ending the use of horse-drawn carriages. This was the Watervliet Fire Chief's car, newly purchased in 1929. Standing by the vehicle left is J. Gregory Nealon, the county coroner. By the 1920s, the city had established a full fire department. On the far right is Battalion Chief John Wall, and far left is Assistant Chief Edward Larkin. Also, by the 1920s, the police department was well established. Here the force poses in front of the City Hall in 1926. In the front row are Sergeant Charles Noller, Chief John McGrath, and Captain Frederick M. Broderick. The police department in 1926 obtained new motorcycles. The police department became motorized around 1918. Here, the new cycle drivers of the police department pose in front of City Hall. Chief Michael Corbett was appointed chief in 1909. He was shot by a robber in 1922 and died 2 days later. By the late 1800s, much of the city was still farmland, and all lands north of present-day 8th Avenue were mostly dairy farms. One of the largest was the Lansing Farm that operated until the 1930s. The original Lansing farmhouse is on 23rd Street between 10th and 12th Avenues. The city still had plenty of room in the early 1900s, and people could still enjoy strolls and outings on the banks of the Hudson. The Atchison Block Building was a major hotel in West Troy. It was built on the corner of 19th Street and 3rd Avenue in 1875. The building still stands today. Downtown Watervliet as it looked about 1910. These are stores on the east side of Broadway with a big laundry house at the right. This is the Masonic Temple. The building housed the major fraternal organization for over half a century. It was located on Broadway, south of 16th Street, and was torn down to make room for I-787. A heavy snowstorm, possibly the blizzard of 1888. The city suffered a severe flood in 1913. This shows a flood on First Avenue. At the right is the home of the Meneely who ran the foundry. Here is a view of the flood on 14th Street, inundating part of the new Watervliet High School, now the Civic Center. This is the 1913 flood, looking south towards Broadway. The 1936 flood on Broadway. The Ford dealer is on the right. A flood on 19th Street and Broadway. A view of the flood on Broadway. Water covered the tracks so that the trolleys could not run. In the 1930s, the state of New York built the Sacandaga Reservoir to catch the melting snow from the Adirondacks. After the construction of the reservoir, the cities along the Hudson River no longer suffered these severe spring floods. This was the corner of Broadway and 15th Street as late as 1969. Just below the building on the left was the rock on the bank of the Hudson where John Gibbons built his house in 1806. Part of the City Hall is on the right. This is the corner of Broadway and 15th Street as it looks today, after extensive urban renewal and the later construction of the I-787 highway. This is Broadway today, looking north from 16th Street. This is a view of the city from the Congress Street Bridge looking south. This is a view looking at the Congress Street Bridge from 19th Street. This plaque commemorates the victory of the Watervliet baseball team. Watervliet teams have won state championships in sports. In 1976, Watervliet, along with other communities in the country, celebrated the bicentennial of America's independence from Britain in 1776. The Watervliet Historical Society was active during the bicentennial celebration in Watervliet in 1976. Here they have set up a display at the former State Bank of Albany. The display was changed each month by the members and displayed old pictures and articles of Watervliet history. This Meneely bell was found in Utica and came from an abandoned church. It was purchased by the Covert Manufacturing Company, brought back to Watervliet and repaired, and mounted by the employees of the Stretch Machine Works. It is now in the foyer of the O'Brien buildings between the Senior Citizen Center and the library. Here, the members of the Watervliet Historical Society display a small Meneely bell carillon for the children of the city. During the construction of the I-787 highway, the state built Riverfront Park. Once more, residents can enjoy the riverbank as the people did a century ago. The city established a cultural park between 26th and 27th Streets on 2nd Avenue. This area displays a segment of the Erie Canal as it appeared before the big ditch was filled in.
My name is Fran Cerri. My husband Larry worked on this presentation in the 1980s. Larry passed away in October 1987 at the age of 64. Larry was a teacher, and I know he would be happy knowing he taught us all how important Watervliet was in the past and to share his vision of the future of Watervliet, especially for its children.